Smoke is stacking up over central Oregon right now, thick enough to blot out the sun in the middle of the afternoon. Helicopters are running water and retardant drops back to back across half a dozen counties. And thousands of families have already been told to leave their homes behind with almost no notice. This is not a hypothetical worst-case scenario. This is where Oregon actually stands this week, in what has now officially become the most destructive wildfire season the state has ever recorded. I am jumping straight into this update because the situation is moving too fast for a slow introduction, so let's get right into what is actually happening on the ground. The headline number is almost hard to process. Oregon has now surpassed 2 million acres burned so far this season, breaking the state's previous all-time record, which was set just 2 years ago in 2024. I want to be clear about what makes this record so alarming beyond the raw number itself. This milestone has been reached with the traditionally most dangerous stretch of the entire fire season, August and September, still largely ahead. Officials on the ground have been blunt about just how unusual this pace is. Oregon Department of Forestry's Jessica Noyar put it plainly, saying it is genuinely rare to see this much acreage burned this early, with the season's typically worst months still to come. Let me walk y'all through exactly what is actively burning right now, because this is not one massive fire. It is dozens of separate incidents, stretched across a huge swath of the state simultaneously. The largest is the Roe Creek Complex fire in central Oregon, which has burned more than 320,000 acres and remains just over half contained at roughly 53%. The Bench Fire, which has directly threatened the community of Warm Springs, has burned close to 67,000 acres and has made real progress, now sitting near 86% contained. The Shingle Fire has burned about 73,000 acres and is roughly 70% contained, but containment progress is not universal across every incident. The Grasshopper Fire in Wasco County exploded to more than 18,000 acres with zero containment as it bore down on the towns of Pine Hollow and Wamick, a threat serious enough that the Oregon State Fire Marshal formally invoked the Emergency Conflagration Act to pull in additional out-of-state firefighting resources. The second Flat Fire in Harney County has consumed more than 300,000 acres on its own, forcing evacuations for tribal members on the Burns Paiute Reservation. And across Gilliam, Wheeler, Wasco, Crook, Jefferson, and Umatilla counties, additional major fires, including the Hay Creek Complex and the Hagen Fire near the Umatilla Indian Reservation, continue burning. With the Hagen Fire significant enough that the Oregon National Guard has activated 4 helicopters and roughly 20 service members specifically to help fight it. I want to explain what actually set this crisis in motion, because it happened with alarming speed. A series of lightning storms swept across Oregon in the final days of July, and instead of sparking the usual handful of isolated fire starts a typical storm system might produce, this particular sequence ignited dozens of separate wildfires within a very short window, instantly stretching already limited firefighting resources across the entire state. Layered directly on top of that ignition event, persistently hot, dry weather, and strong, gusty winds have kept fueling explosive fire growth ever since, and the underlying fuel conditions across Oregon are running exceptionally dry, even by the standards of an already dry Pacific Northwest summer. U.S. Forest Service spokesperson Mary Ellen Fitzgerald described it directly, explaining that this part of Oregon is always dry in summer, but this particular year, conditions are exceptionally dry, and drying out unusually early in the season compared to what crews typically see. Now let's talk about the people actually living through this, because that is ultimately what matters most here. At the peak of evacuation activity, more than 24,000 Oregonians were under some form of evacuation order, with thousands specifically placed under Level 3 Go Now status, the most urgent classification issued, meaning immediate departure with no time to gather belongings or wait for further updates. Multiple homes have already been lost to these fires, and even in areas where evacuation levels have since been reduced, officials continue warning residents that power may still be out, and the fire crews remain actively engaged, extinguishing hotspots along fire lines, meaning road closures and detours can shift with very little advance warning even after the most severe danger in a given area has technically passed. This crisis is also not confined to Oregon alone, and I think that regional scope matters for understanding just how severe this stretch of the Pacific Northwest's summer has become. Just across the state line, wildfires burning through Spokane and Stevens counties in eastern Washington have forced thousands of additional residents from their homes and destroyed hundreds of structures, a situation serious enough that Washington's governor issued a statewide emergency proclamation of his own. 2 states, both simultaneously dealing with historic or near-historic fire activity at the exact same point on the calendar, tells you this is a genuinely regional crisis rather than an isolated Oregon story. More than 12,000 firefighters and support personnel are currently working across Oregon alone to contain these blazes, battling fire behavior driven by conditions crews describe as genuinely unusual, even for a region that expects a difficult fire season most years. And forecasters are already warning that more lightning is expected across northeastern Oregon in the coming days, raising the very real possibility of an entirely new round of fire starts layering on top of an already overstretched firefighting effort. So here's exactly what I want anybody in the affected region doing right now. If you live anywhere across central or eastern Oregon, including Deschutes, Jefferson, Wasco, Crook, Gilliam, Wheeler, Harney, or Umatilla counties, or across the currently affected counties in eastern Washington, get your go bag packed and your evacuation route mapped out before any order reaches your address, not after. If you are already under an evacuation notice at any level, follow it fully and immediately, since a level 3 Go Now order means exactly that, right now, with no delay. Watch for updated roadblock information even in areas where evacuation levels have recently been lowered, since active fire crews continue working hotspots that can change road conditions with little warning. And if you are anywhere in the broader region dealing primarily with smoke rather than direct flame exposure, protect your indoor air by sealing up your home, running your HVAC on recirculate, and using a high-quality air purifier if one is available to you, since wildfire smoke carries genuine respiratory health risk even far outside the fire's actual perimeter. Let me give you all some perspective on just how far outside the norm this season really is. Oregon's previous record season was set in 2024, and before that, back in 2021, the state endured what was at the time considered one of its most destructive fire years on record, with more than 800,000 acres burned across over 1,600 individual fires. This year has already surpassed the combined scale of both of those seasons, and it reached that point before the calendar even turned to the traditionally most dangerous stretch of Oregon's fire year. Researchers who track wildfire trends across the American West have connected patterns like this one to a broader, well-established shift, including shrinking mountain snowpack, earlier spring snowmelt, and progressively drier summer conditions settling in across the interior Pacific Northwest, all of which stretch out the window during which the landscape sits primed to burn. This is not a freak, isolated bad luck season. It fits squarely into a trend fire scientists have been documenting and warning about for years now. I also want to touch on the strain this crisis is placing on firefighting resources themselves, because that strain has real consequences for how quickly any individual fire actually gets contained. With more than a dozen large active fires burning simultaneously across the state, and additional major fires burning at the same time just across the border in Washington, the pool of available fire crews, aircraft, and specialized equipment gets stretched thinner with every new ignition. That is exactly why the Emergency Conflagration Act invocation on the Grasshopper fire matters so much, since it formally unlocks additional out-of-state resources for a fire that local and in-state crews alone were struggling to keep pace with. It is also why continued lightning forecasts for the coming days carry such serious weight, since any new round of ignitions would be landing on top of a firefighting system that is already operating close to its practical capacity, rather than starting from a position of reserve strength. I also want to explain the deeper environmental backdrop that set the stage for this crisis months before that late July lightning ever struck. Oregon entered this summer already carrying a significant moisture deficit, following a winter with below-average mountain snowpack across much of the state's central and eastern ranges. That thinner-than-normal snowpack melted off earlier than usual heading into spring, leaving soil and vegetation with less accumulated moisture reserve to draw on through the hottest, driest stretch of summer. By the time those late July lightning storms rolled through, fuels across huge sections of central and eastern Oregon were already primed well beyond their typical seasonal dryness, which is a significant part of why this year's fires have grown so explosively fast compared to a more typical season, even accounting for the unusually large number of simultaneous ignitions. I also want to touch on the ecological toll a fire season of this scale takes, because it is easy to focus purely on structures and acreage while overlooking the broader landscape impact. Wildlife across the burned regions, including deer, elk, and a wide range of smaller mammals and bird species, face immediate displacement as their habitat burns, often pushing animals into unfamiliar and sometimes populated areas as they search for unburned food sources and water. Rangeland that ranchers depend on for grazing can take multiple growing seasons to fully recover, and burned forest land, particularly in areas that see severe, high-intensity fire behavior, can take decades to regrow to anything resembling its pre-fire structure. Watershed health is affected as well, since burned hillsides lose the vegetation that normally holds soil in place, creating elevated flash flood and mudslide risk across burn scars for years afterward, whenever heavy rain eventually does fall on that exposed ground. None of this diminishes the urgency of the immediate human safety concerns I have already covered, but it is worth understanding that a fire season of this scale reshapes the landscape in ways that will still be playing out long after the last fire on this list reaches full containment. I will keep tracking this crisis closely as containment efforts continue and as that next round of forecasted lightning activity approaches, and I will bring y'all updates the moment conditions shift in either direction. If this breakdown helped you understand the true scale of what Oregon and the broader Pacific Northwest are facing right now, please subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications. And share this video with anybody you know across this region. Because a record-breaking fire season with two of its most dangerous months still ahead is exactly the kind of story people need to keep paying attention to. I will keep watching the fire lines for y'all, and I will see y'all in the next one. Stay safe out there.